Well, while the current existential crisis to Australian football takes a little bit of a breather in the national second tier, let's have a crack at the broadcast deal, shall we? A couple of off-hand comments from a Foxtel executive that probably don't mean a whole lot gives us an excuse to talk about the future of the A-League's TV arrangements. There's pot shots at the AFC while we're at it, as FIFPro release a report with a rather scathing indictment of the 2023-24 Women's Club Championships ahead of the AWCL kicking off this weekend. The Australia Cup is back this week, the Socceroos are on their way to Melbourne, and a whole host of other updates on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, supported by Deploy Football. My name is Lachlan Avil, and Christian Montegan is joining me today. He's very happy because we are back on Riverside, his favourite recording platform. Hello, Christian.
It's only my favourite recording platform because of the wait time on the other one, on podcast. You had to wait 30 minutes, 45 minutes to download it. Like, it was just an absolute pain. So, no, Riverside's the way to go, surely, from now on, hopefully.
Just campaigning strongly, Jacob Stevens. Hello to you.
Hello, Lockie.
And Poletti as well. Good evening.
Good evening, and I think that we should stop naming podcast platforms on our podcast now. Keep in mind that if any podcasting platform is out there, we are open to sponsorships, and we would gladly promote your product in exchange for some form of benefit, financial or in contra. So I think that's the last time we name drop any podcasting platform on this podcast.
Jeez, don't sell out too hard, Poletti.
And I was ripped on for wanting an all-expenses-paid trip to the Gold Coast.
True. All right. Well, let's get stuck into it, shall we? I mentioned it off the top, but the CEO of Foxtel's streaming and advertising division, Julian Ogren, says that they would absolutely be interested in looking at picking up the A-League rights should they become available again in 2026. Now, this was through an interview with media and marketing outlet Mumbrella. The quote is, "I think at the end of the day, we have a very strong sports acquisition team who's been in the business for a long time and knows everyone. We are always talking to all of the sports providers wherever they are in their cycle. You never know, maybe one day." Now, Christian, personally, I don't think there's too much to read into this. I think it just gives us an excuse to talk about it. He was asked a question in an interview and he gave a response, and it would be bad business to just rule yourselves out. But let's take a look at it, shall we? So Foxtel obviously haven't been the happiest of partners with the A-Leagues. They were a great broadcaster for a long time. The ending perhaps left a lot to be desired. Where do you sit on this issue? Obviously, we have Paramount Plus, who people aren't particularly pleased with either.
I mean, me personally, I know this nostalgia factor will come into, and Poletti will touch on that a bit later, but for me, it's always been, besides those last couple of years when it dwindled down and there were real question marks, and obviously it went to Paramount and Channel 10, it's been a great servant for football in this country, both the A-League and internationally. You can argue that women's football, it wasn't treated the same, but I think if they did get the rights back in the future, whenever that may be, then I think, the demand now for women's football after the Women's World Cup, we've seen, women's football domestically grow as well, more participation rates. So they're not going to be treating it like that anymore, I think, if they do get the rights. There were other factors as well, like, the Premier League, they lost the rights, Fox Sports lost the rights to the Premier League. So that was one aspect where there was no real incentive to keep the A-League, for the broadcaster, networks like, beIN Sports, all of that sort of stuff, only started to get into the equation, I think a couple of years later down the line. So, there's different sort of factors that went into play. Obviously financially, that was the big aspect that, dragged it down really, and then, sort of gave it to Paramount and Channel 10. They took on the rights for, I think it was a cheaper price, but you could probably argue now that nothing much has really changed. We were promised, one game per week, I think on a Saturday, when the deal was announced, on free-to-air television. The second season, that promise was sort of broken, and it went back to, I think, 10 Bold and one of the other sort of Channel 10 programs.
It's worth noting, that still is free-to-air.
Yeah, it is now. Yeah, it's sort of changed a bit. So, when you talk about sort of respecting the code, I guess you can look at it both, Fox Sports didn't do themselves any favors those last couple of years. And then Paramount, you can argue, they haven't been perfect as well with their broadcast issues. as well. So yeah, there's sort of a bit to play on both sides, but I think if Fox Sports did get the rights back, I don't, as long as they're financially equipped, and I don't see the real issue long term, because we have seen in the past they've proven to be, a good network to cover the game.
So I think, like usual, Christian's on one end of this, Poletti's on the other, and then there's me somewhere in the middle. Look, I think, Christian, one of the often complaints that we hear about Australian football in general is that everyone has got their own interests at heart. And to be honest, I think that's just a statement about business and humans and the human condition is people want to take care of themselves, right? So all these economic factors that are at play at different times, people are going to do what's best for them. And yes, there is doing right by the code, but there's also doing right by your employers as well. And so for me, Poletti, I think we can probably leave a lot of that behind. I'd have the same argument about Paramount in that, they're protecting themselves through COVID, whatever the contracts were. We've talked about this plenty as well, but you've got to do right for you. Do you want to give us the against argument?
So I think my biggest problem with this, and this has been the problem since day dot, when the A-Leagues went to Paramount, is everyone's like, oh, but what about Fox Sports? What about Fox Sports? And I feel like it's because they're just living in the nostalgia heyday of the mid-2010s, where the A-League was pumping, games were selling out on a regular basis. It was match day Saturday. You've got everything just rolling into each other with the Premier League afterwards. And that's the main reason I think it is. I think it's nostalgia. I think people deliberately choose not to look at the last 2 years of the deal, and then even then going into the last 3 or 4 years, particularly as it relates to the A-League women, then the W League, the Hexagon of Death, Tuba Guy. I said this in the chat. There was a 480p stream coming out of Dorrien Gardens on a Tuesday night that had no graphics and no commentary, because Fox just, the way I saw it at least, couldn't be asked. It was literally the only graphic was rolling across the bottom of the stream. We apologize for these technical issues, which just isn't good enough. Would things be different this time around in terms of those sort of errors and stuff? Maybe it is, but the fact of the matter is that this happened under Foxtel's watch, and I'm not going to pretend like Paramount's been smooth sailing either. There was a game where a W League game that wasn't even broadcast. I want to say Wanderers and Phoenix at Wanderers Football Park, because of torrential weather in Sydney, they couldn't get the broadcast equipment out to Wanderers Football Park. So I completely understand that. And then there's just been some other small issues along the way. So it's not to say the Paramount right has been smooth sailing, because it hasn't. But for the most part, the game's been treated with dignity and respect. And I just worry, because the other thing to come of this as well is that I think it was Crikey last week had the exclusive the image that came out of then Fox Sports CEO Patrick Delaney doing the Nazi salute. And, he immediately came out and went, apologized, but tried to pin it on Wanderers fans, saying I would have been impersonating, something from a Wanderers fans. And then the video surfaced a couple of days later through the Sydney Morning Herald that showed, well, no, actually he wasn't. But, and I understand he's long since departed the role, but you've got to kind of then maybe look at the culture as a whole, where it's like, okay, is it still anti-football? Is it still let's pin things on, Wanderers fans and the like, at every opportunity we get to bring the game down? Because the fact that his mind immediately jumped to Wanderers fans speaks to me about the culture of what was Fox Sports at the time. As I said, whether people have moved on, but it's still, for the moment, a News Corp owned entity, and we know what News Corp have done to the game almost every single opportunity they get, particularly in the last 12 months.
It's a very valid argument, and it's one that is absolutely worth considering. And look, Jacob, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to try and predict where you're going to go with this as well, because in my head, the culture arguments, the giving a damn arguments, I guess, are all there, and this is from the past of the A-Leagues. But for me, when I look at the economic situation that the leagues are in, competition is good. And if there's at least 2 different networks, and it doesn't have to be Channel 10 and Foxtel, obviously there's more out there as well. As long as there's 2 and they're bidding against each other, that's good for the league in the long run financially.
Yeah, because it means that there's a product that they're after, right? If you're only getting one bidder, it means that nobody really sort of fancies it and just somebody has to take it on. Whereas if you've, at least got two, you know that there's something there that they want, whatever that might be, whether it's the fact that the women's game has now boomed with the popularity of the Matildas and, can they try and capitalize on that? Or whether it's they think that there's a really good product there that's going to continue to grow and become more and more financially viable as the years go on, who knows? But like you said, Lockie, it is this sort of, this good look for the league, right, if there are more than one. But I also think that it's partially on us as fans as well. And I know that I sort of take this approach a lot, but we have to make sure that there is a product that these people are going to want to invest in. We have to be the ones to watch the games because, these broadcast companies aren't going to invest a bunch of money into a product that nobody watches. So, while it's easy to go, but, the streaming platform's really bad and it's this and it's that. And it's like, yeah, I understand that, but we also have to get the numbers up somehow for this, for people to be able to look at it and go, right, there's a product here that we can go after. And I think that sometimes here, Australian football fans a bit reactionary in terms of, there's been one hiccup that I've experienced, so I'm just going to refuse to watch the games until they fix it. And it's like, it does seem like it's a little bit all or nothing here. And I think we need to find that middle ground of, look, we still need to watch these games because if nothing else, it at least gives these broadcast companies something to look at and go, right, there are people at least watching it. And then they can go, well, how do we get even more watching it? Oh, well, we iron out some of the issues that they have been facing, or we do this differently, or we do that differently, right? Whereas if you're starting with nothing, you go, well, what do we do? And why should we even buy the rights for it? So I think that's the other position to look at, as well as, yes, it's which company is going to be better for the growth of the game and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's on fans, on us as well, to make sure that the product is actually there and that it's an attractive prospect for these companies.
Can I just butt in there with that point? So yes, the emphasis is on the supporters to, watch the games, attend the games, grow the game in that aspect. But at the same time, it's on these networks like Channel 10 to promote the game. And I feel like Paramount and Channel 10, it's been almost a disaster with the commercial side of it, advertising. The word just isn't out there enough. How many times have I heard people say, oh, I didn't know this game was on. I didn't know that game was on. Oh, are they playing today? Like, it needs to be, the awareness needs to be spread more, and the ownership is on them to do that. Because if that doesn't happen, then how are fans supposed to know when games are on, what's happening? So I know, marketing and the money side of it, unless, if people aren't watching it, then of course, these networks aren't going to be, pumping in the money. But at the same time, you've got to start from somewhere, right? Otherwise, it's just not going to really grow the way you want it to. So there's that point as well.
But I also want to say that, like, even during sort of those golden years, right, from probably about 2011 to 2015, 2016, around there, right? Even then, I don't think that there was mass marketing, to this level that people, envision there being. It was still sort of a relatively underground product in the mainstream. It's just that these core supporters were turning up week in, week out. Yeah. And I think that's something that we've not had for a long, long time. And we're starting to see crowd numbers creep back up. We're seeing year-on-year growth in the number of, in streaming numbers and broadcast numbers and things like that as well, which is a good sign. But I think that even back then, that was still something that wasn't necessarily capitalized on. So you're right, Christian, it is something that it definitely needs to be looked at, whoever comes in next, because there's a real missed opportunity there that is continually happening with the league, where I just don't think that word's ever really gotten out there. But then how much of that is, well, how viable is it? Do people outside of football circles even care? Yep. So, it's that balancing act.
And that's exactly my argument, is that whilst, Christian, you're right, that the onus is on these broadcasters to spread the word. It goes back to my original point. People are going to do what are in their best interests. And instead of complaining about that, we should look to harness it. We should look to create a product that makes them want to advertise it and get it out to the mainstream. That's the trick that people are missing here. It's not about, you can have the argument about whether it's the broadcaster's responsibility to grow the game, or how about we make it profitable for them to do so, So it goes back to that argument, Jacob, that you had. I think fans watch the games, turn up, support your teams in any way you can, tell other people to get down, get your mates, your family and your friends. And the more eyes that we put on the game, the more that broadcasters and then advertisers, Poletti, are going to want those eyes for themselves.
Because I think that's the most important point here, and I think if you look at most of the other sports in Australia, and this is not going to be a Code Wars argument, which we're seemingly incredibly prone to in Australian football, is that for the most part, they have a free-to-air provider and they have a pay TV provider, which is usually Foxtel. Do you think that we could maybe get to a point with the A-League where that's the broadcast solution, where, like, because we sort of have that now where it's the free-to-air provider in Channel 10 for 2 games a week on 10 bowl with the A-League men's competition, all the A-League women's on 10 play, but everything's in the central platform with Paramount Plus, but they're all owned by the same people. Do you think we could get to a point where, using the NRL, for example, it's 3 games a week on Channel 9, but every game is live on Foxtel, or the AFL, where I think it's 4 games a week on free-to-air and every game's on Foxtel, that, yeah, okay, we might get 2 games a week on Channel 10, but, every game is on Foxtel, or, Channel 9 has 4 games a week and Channel 10 has 3 games a week and everything else is on Paramount Plus or Stan Sport or, whatever. Like, we get to a point where we could have multiple broadcasters owned by different people bidding on the rights, because I think that would create an interesting dynamic that I don't believe we've seen before in...
We have seen it before, because during the days of Foxtel, at different times, SBS had rights to certain games.
But those
the ABC,
I don't believe those were organised by the league. I believe those were organised by Fox Sports to have a free-to-air component with it.
But that's fine, isn't it? Regardless of how the cookie gets made.
I think, because I just don't know how much revenue that would bring compared to having 2 separate broadcast deals total, is what I'm sort of more getting at, as opposed to, okay,
Sure.
everything's behind the Fox Sports paywall, but then, the free-to-air provider is just like, oh, Fox Sports is paying us to broadcast these games, as opposed to these games actually, or, however that works. Like, because right now, as I said, it's 10, it's Paramount, they own all the rights and they choose what games they're putting where, as opposed to, having 2 separate broadcasters that have their own separate broadcast deals is what I was getting at.
Yeah, look, I think there's a fine line, because if that's something that the host broadcaster would want to do, then there would be in the contract saying if they were allowed to do that or not. So, I mean, the value gets made up in different ways, but, you have a good point there. Hey, Jacob.
Yeah, what's up?
When you're playing football, would you prefer to play with an old, gross, torn-away ball with a bunch of bumps on it, or a perfectly shaped, clean one that they use in international matches?
Well, I mean, the easy answer, the second one.
Well, you're in luck, because Deploy Football are sponsoring this episode of the pod. Proudly Australian-owned and operated since 2012, they are one of only 2 Aussie brands to ever receive the FIFA Quality Pro license. That's the tippity-top for footballs.
I mean, that is pretty good, but, we've got the ball. There's still another problem.
What's that?
Well, with the season that Adelaide have just had, I don't really feel like wearing my United kit when I'm out there on the pitch.
That is very fair. But in that case, you can go and get your own custom kits from Deploy as well. Fully sublimated on just a 15-day turnaround with no lock-in contracts for clubs. You can even get your own custom footballs. They've got the largest range of program-specific footballs in the country.
Nice. Sounds to me like we need some gear for the pod.
That is a very good idea. We will have to get onto them about that.
Yeah, we should do that. It would be sick.
Deploy are proud partners of state federations all over the country and offer clubs and individuals the best value for money on footballs, teamwear and equipment. If you want to get the best for your club, head to Deploy and let them know we sent you. All right, let's move on then, shall we? We'll take some pot shots at some other footballing associations. The Asia/Oceania arm of FIFPro, which is the Global Players Union, have released a quite scathing report into the AFC's administration of the 2023-24 Women's Club Championship. I wrote this up on the website for roundballaustralia.com.au. You could read the full report there. It comes just a couple of days before the first edition of the AFC Women's Champions League kicks off on the weekend. Melbourne City not quite involved. This is the preliminary phase. They kick off a little bit later. But the report is based around this club championship that Sydney FC participated in last year. And it really just goes to highlight, again, from FIFPro and the PFA as well, the Professional Footballers of Australia, just how much minimal communication and collaboration there is between the AFC and its players, and how it is hurting these continental competitions. So the main criticisms of this report are threefold. We'll take them one by one. First, Poletti, is this debacle around the final of the competition. So after the group stages of the club championships had finished, Sydney FC were, of course, eliminated. The AFC in March, a couple of months later, basically just decided not to host the final. They didn't want to. We weren't going to just decide a winner for this competition. The clubs, along with federations and leagues from Japan and South Korea, because they were where the two teams were from, complained and had meetings with the AFC. Eventually, the Ura Red Diamonds hosted and won the final 2-1 in front of a crowd of over 5,000 spectators. Here's a quote from the report. The AFC acted unilaterally and communicated without transparency. This culture must change if these continental competitions are to succeed for all stakeholders. That's quite a brutal line.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I think, just looking at this report in general, like when I read the article that you wrote, my immediate thought was, even by AFC standards, this seems pretty shocking and damning of how they're going about the Women's Champions League. And I think the key part of what I've said there was even by AFC standards, because we know how difficult it is at times to get things out of the AFC. Like, they have a media inbox that, like, I'm pretty sure is monitored by a squirrel, because you never get an answer or a response out of it. And that's not just me talking; it's other people talking as well. Although I'm not going to put the squirrel comment in their mouths. That's entirely a Polettiism. But it's just,
I was going to say, it's an interesting one.
it's just one of those things where it's like we know how difficult it is to get clear answers about anything out of the AFC. So this really doesn't come as a shock, but it's just the damning nature of it. Women's football is growing all around the world, and they had their test pilot last year, which by all accounts seemingly went okay. It wasn't anything great. Like, there was no broadcast deal for it. I know, like, we had to rely here in Australia for Sydney FC's group on the Uzbekistani FA to broadcast it. Speaking of going back to our previous complaints about Dorian Garden stream on a Tuesday night, this was this was just as bad, if not worse. So it wasn't great. Like, I can't imagine the ACL2 or the AFC Cup or whatever going ahead, or this new Challenge League going ahead without any sort of competent broadcast on the men's side. But on the women's side, it's just like, yeah, cool, just whatever. We don't care. And I just, I really was shocked by everything that came out of this report, and I'm stunned.
Yeah. So the one thing to give the AFC the benefit of the doubt is that the Women's Club Championship was always positioned as a kind of pilot program to work themselves into the Champions League format. So there's a little bit of room for error there, but obviously the question now becomes, okay, have they made that leap? Have they taken that next step? And we already know that they haven't in certain respects, which we'll get to. But the second issue that I want to talk about is the financial impact on players themselves. Now, the Women's Champions League will have some prize money, unlike the Club Championship. The winner's purse is $1.3 million. You get a guaranteed $100,000 for making the group stage, plus $20,000 for each win. So we kind of know roughly about costs that teams have to travel. It will probably cover costs to a certain extent. Maybe some teams will have some more issues than others. But obviously there's still a gap between properly rewarding players and staff members and all this kind of thing as well. So there is a little bit of money, but still not enough. As part of the survey, over a third of the players said that they didn't consider themselves professional players, which is a really key sticking point, and 6% even said amateur status. So there were 88 players surveyed in this report. They were all participants in this club championship, and less than half of them said that they earned more than $10,000 US per year. And a quarter said that football was not their primary source of income. And you can imagine with this club championship that had only 8 teams from 8 of the best countries in terms of women's football in Asia, you can see how expanding to 22 teams from 22 countries will lower those professionalism numbers even further. So, Christian, when you have so many players that rely on second jobs, like 50% of the A-League women's competitions in Australia, a very developed country, they need to be working. And even then, when they come back from these competitions, A-League women's fixtures get rearranged, they get pushed down the road, and it multiplies the effects.
No, definitely 100%. And, you get this scenario where you've got players working, different jobs on the side during the day. It impacts their training schedule. It impacts so many things, both on and off the pitch where they can't perform at their absolute best. And, like you said, that statistic about players not thinking that they're professional, and more of like the amateur side of it. That's alarming in itself, really, that they think that. And so, with that said, how are you supposed to, grow the game, in Asia specifically? That's going to be, a massive issue, if it does, sort of remain stagnant. But obviously with this new prize money coming in, it's a start. But like you said, Lockie, it's not adequate enough, to grow the game, long term, look in the future to make these players more professional. Because if that sort of gets patted down, then, the prize money obviously increases, more interest in the game. If you've got players working different jobs, working 5-6 hours, trying to make extra income, then why should, fans pay good money to, to watch these players perform not at their best? So, it sort of trickles down to sort of the bottom of the pyramid, really, where everyone's affected by it. So the onus is on the AFC to make sure, it's their responsibility to take care, not only the financial side of it, but, sort of all aspects, really, to ensure that, everyone's on the same page, the communication's there, because at the moment, everyone's just not on the same page. And, where have we heard that story before? Australian football. So, if that sort of gets, ironed out, then, I can definitely see, change happening, because there is a lot of potential in Asian football. We're not really aware of, women's teams, outside of Australia, as much as, besides sort of the diehard fans who, follow the dub, and, they're across all the Asian sides. Yeah, I know. Yeah. What do, Poletti? Yeah, I know. But besides that, we don't really know their stories, but it's all about, the financial side of it. If that improves, and all of that is gonna, be better for it.
The A-League Women's is one of the better leagues in Asia in terms of its broadcastability. If there's no rights deal in the territory, every game is available on YouTube. So people around the world can watch the dub with relative ease. They do have equal CBA with the A-League men's, but that's sort of also a problem because they're guaranteed the same amount of minimum full-time contracts, but A-League women's players are only on 9-month contracts. They don't have contracts for those other 3 months of the year, whereas the A-League men's players are year-round. So it begins to create this inequality where instead of getting, I think, 66,500 over a 12-month period, it goes down to whatever 75% of that number is. And that was at my last check as to what the number was. It could have gone up a little bit. I haven't checked the CBA in quite some time. But, it's around there. So I don't know about you, but, I live on the outskirts of Sydney, and I struggle on 50,000 a year. Imagine players having to live in the CBD itself, on $50,000 a year because they're on 9-month contracts. You have to have a second job, or you have to hope that you're one of the higher paid players, like a Courtney Vine, who's obviously since departed to the NWSL. But even then, you go back just a couple of years ago, she was, I want to say it was JD Sports. There's all these players in all these different sorts of secondary jobs. Like Sophie Harding found out in the middle of a 10-hour shift that she was selected for the Matildas. That's not good enough. And this is one of the better leagues in Asia. So I think getting everyone, as you said, onto the same page, but just making sure that all these standards are in place to, help everything grow, I think it's massive. $10,000 a year, that's nothing.
And especially when you consider, the survey that said about 2/3 of the players did consider themselves professional. Well, that's probably including a lot of these A-League women's players that are professional, but only for 3/4 of the time, right? So you got to consider those numbers as well. There's a lot of room to grow for women's football, obviously, but you really would think that the confederation, the Continental Confederation, should be leading the way in that, to be honest. And then, Jacob, I talked about giving them a little bit of a free pass because of the pilot program nature of the club championship. Well, we do have one confirmed failure already in terms of the Champions League. And the main complaint here is for the quarterfinal phase of the competition, very specific, because that is the one round where teams essentially have an opportunity to host a game of football, because every other stage is being played at these centralised venues. So maybe you might get lucky. But, definitely for Melbourne City, this quarterfinal game is their only chance to host a game. And what has happened here is that a lot of the regulations in terms of hosting games have just been copied and pasted from the men's regulations for the Men's Champions League Elite. Things like the clean stadium costs, which we know can reach up to $50,000 per game. That was, I believe it was a Melbourne City quote, actually, in an earlier report. And then this is the real kick in the teeth for me. The home club has the responsibility to provide 5-star accommodation, vehicles, international buffet-style meals, laundry and SIM cards for AFC delegations. Jacob, especially when there are little to no player standards outlined in these kind of regulations, that one hits a little bit harder.
Yeah, and look, I think it sort of reflects the attitude that the AFC have towards women's football, right? Is that, like Poletti and Christian have touched on, is that they kind of just don't really care about it, that they want all of these things for themselves, but they couldn't care less about the players. They're not going to tell players about, what's going on. They're not going to communicate with them. They're not going to act transparently. And they're going to, make them play in this competition where, they get treated to, 5-star luxury, and the players aren't even on professional contracts, and it just reeks of hypocrisy. But it does make sense for them, right? Because you go, well, why does the AFC care about women's football? And they don't, right? The AFC, their main focus, in the last few years, right, was on the World Cup, and it was on, trying to sort of, I guess, flip those stereotypes that were made, especially about some of the countries and their footballing programs in the western part of the confederation, right? So, your Saudis, Saudi Arabias, your Qatars, your Bahrains, those sorts of countries where it's all oil money, they don't really care about the product. They host the World Cup to try and flip that, but then they go with this to show that actually, they don't really care about the product of football. It's about, their image on the global stage and things like that. And I think that because this is a small competition in the grand scheme of things, they can sort of get away with doing this sort of stuff because nobody's going to talk about it. So I do think they need to be held to account here, because it's absolutely ridiculous that they can go in and demand all of these things from clubs. And yet, the players, who cares about them? We're just going to make them play. Yeah, we know that they've got no money. Oh well, like that's not our problem. And it's like, yeah, but you're the same guys who, you're putting in millions and millions and millions of dollars to host the World Cup in stadiums that you then literally dismantle and ship off to other countries, for a fee. You don't even sell them. You're paying to get rid of them. You're putting all this money into football, but you really don't care about it. It's all about your image and the things that you can get from it. And look, I know I'm getting a bit, I'm a bit strong on this, but I absolutely despise it, because I hate what football's become, especially with, continental and international competitions, because it's just a money grab, and it's the same people at the top that are making these same decisions every time. The AFC, they clearly have not, changed their tune. They're showing their true character still, that they don't care about the game as a whole. They care about what it's going to do for them. So, that's really annoying. And like you said, it's a kick in the teeth, because they don't care about the players. They don't care about the product. They only care about what they can get from it.
Another point that I think is indicative of that kind of attitude is that I've covered a few of these reports now from the PFA and FIFA Pro talking about the AFC and their competitions. The first one I did was the Men's Champions League report back in February, and pretty much everyone since then, one of the central recommendations of pretty much everything has been, we just want to talk more with the AFC. Let us collaborate, let us communicate. We know what the players want. Let us just tell you what the players want. And, regardless of what the AFC think, if they really want to help players out and get these things better, we can tell you how to do it. You just have to listen. And so far, it seems like that hasn't happened. All right, let's move back to Australia. We're going to take a look at the Australia Cup round of 16 because it is kicking off this Sunday afternoon. 2 big games that we're going to focus on today because the rest are happening midweek next week. Obviously, we've got the Newcastle Jets up against the Bulls, Macarthur FC, and South Melbourne against Olympic FC from Queensland. 2 massive games, Christian. It's nice that we get some Sunday afternoon football back-to-back. A little preview of the Saturday on Paramount this year.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, it lives up to the billing because obviously you mentioned the Jets and Macarthur facing off in the round of 16. You'd think that's a big opportunity. Whoever wins that tie to, make a deep run into the final, given the sort of kinder side of the draw of the bracket on the left side. So, whoever prevails from that has a big opportunity because from that, I can probably only see South Melbourne as the only NPL side. I think you've said this as well, Lockie, that I truly believe, can challenge for, for a final berth. But even
Best
that
placed, yeah.
but even that South Melbourne game, that'll be interesting against Brisbane Olympic. Obviously, South playing at home again. Obviously the passion from their supporters. We saw that against the Phoenix, got them over the line in that 1-0 win. They're going to keep it tight, but I expect South to win, and the Jets and Macarthur, it's pretty much a toss-up, isn't it?
Poletti, what do you think? Are you 50-50 on that game?
I mean, first of all, I want to go back to what you said, a little taste of Sunday afternoon football, as if I haven't been watching NPL Women's on a Sunday afternoon commentating it for the last 20
It's been a few episodes.
That's not what I meant. I meant the double header like we're going to get on Saturdays.
I knew what you meant. Look, for me, I think I don't know what to make of this Newcastle Macarthur game because both looked good in their round of 32 games. We saw Newcastle, have their playoff game. Both are still trying to bed new players into their sides. I don't know. I mean, probably a toss-up. Like, you could tell me that this game's going to go to extra time and I'm going to miss the last half hour of it because I'll be commentating on Sunday afternoon. And I wouldn't be surprised. Like, it would not surprise me if this game goes the distance, if I'm being completely honest. IS probably wants me to lean towards Macarthur. That's also because I just want a quarterfinal game to hopefully cover in Campbelltown. Although actually no, that wouldn't be possible because they'd be playing a member federation side.
They play an
member
NPL
fed
side.
sides automatically host. So
you want the Jets to win.
It doesn't matter which one wins. I'm not going to get to cover a game. It's close to home anyway. So I don't think I think it's a toss up. I think this game will go to extra time.
I want to pick up on something that Christian said. You said that the left side of the draw is open for some of those NPL teams. Who do you reckon determines what like the left or the right or the top side of the draw is? I don't know. Is it just the graphics guy of the host broadcaster, Jacob, that gets the first image?
It's got to be right. They probably just Googled. They were like knockout bracket template. Just like, yeah, that'll do. So whether it's like top to bottom or side to side, like that whatever the template is that they use, that's what they go for. But it is always funny when nobody ever thinks about this. I don't know why this suddenly comes.
Given the lack of communication in the NPL, there's probably 2 sources where it says that's on the right side and a different one that's on the side, and it's all confused and muddled up. Wouldn't even be surprised.
It would be pretty on brand, even for just like the Australia Cup social media channels, to one week have all of the teams on one side and all the other teams on the other, and then the next week to just flip it around just to keep people on their toes. Like, I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? As long as you've got the right teams in the right spots, that's the main thing. But yeah, no, I don't think anybody has probably ever had that thought before, Lockie. So it's it's a good question. I've never had that thought before, so.
Maybe we just have to you look at the draw and you got to pick like a characteristic or something. Like obviously we've got the A-League versus NPL on one side, the right side, as Christian would say, and then you got the NPL pathway on the left or something like that. You got to come up with some other way to describe it.
I guess.
It's like in Star Wars how, they're all fighting in space, but they just all agree that one way is down and one way is up, and they just stay in that.
They're all on the same level, yeah.
Yeah, you've got to somehow universally agree on these things. Anyway, a big afternoon on Sunday of the Cup coming up. We'll go through those results and the other 6 games next Tuesday as well. We're going to stay in Melbourne because the Socceroos are going back to Amy Park. They have been announced to be going up against Saudi Arabia on the 14th of November. That's the 3rd home game in this little run of international windows we have. They'll be returning to Melbourne after about 12 months when they defeated Bangladesh 7-0. This one definitely be a lot tighter affair than what that was. And Christian, it will be vital that the Socceroos pick up a good result because the previous window will be away to Japan. Big one there.
Yeah, so I mean, if you had to pick a game where we'd probably pick up 0 points, you'd have to say it's away to Japan. Historically, from memory, we've really struggled to play there, for whatever reason. Obviously, Japan are a quality outfit, very difficult always to break them down over there. Usually, we don't have the bulk of possession. We sort of pick and choose our moments on the counter. Let Japan have a lot of possession. So yeah, that game against Saudi Arabia the following month, that's at home at Amy Park. It's going to be, I guess, really crucial because that's, I think, the midway point of the group stage. I believe it's the 5th game of the campaign. So that will sort of, set the tone for the second half of the group phase to really, put us in good stead, hopefully. I think this game was either going to be played in Melbourne or Sydney. You need a good crowd for it. A good location, for a big team, whether it's Saudi or Japan, one of those top tier nations. So it makes all the sense in the world, really. But yeah, just as it currently stands, you've obviously got the goalkeeping situation that we touched on in the last podcast. What's going to happen there? Who's Arnold going to select? And then we have to see, a couple of others. I believe Yengi hasn't featured in a game yet for Portsmouth this season. So he was one that was really impressive in that last international window stretch that, we really praised and thought, okay, this could be our new solution up front and in the attacking third. But if he's not playing and getting minutes, then I'm sure Arnold will have to, turn to other alternatives up there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And I think it's a good point about perhaps why they fixtured this game for Melbourne, because Jacob, the other games that we've seen announced so far, we want to go to the Gold Coast, tick that off. We want to go back to Adelaide Oval and play all our South Australians there, tick that off as well. But when it comes to these big games, and obviously Saudi Arabia and Japan are the big 2, we want to get them in places where the atmosphere is really going to give us a competitive advantage. And a packed out Amy Park will definitely do that. And I think Christian may have just tipped it as well. I would not be surprised if that Japan game made its way over to New South Wales.
Yeah. You've got to get those marquee fixtures in the biggest markets where you're most likely to get a good crowd. Like it just makes sense when you've got, like you said, you're bringing these games to Gold Coast or Adelaide that haven't had them in Gold Coast ever, right? And Adelaide in a long time. You're going to get a big crowd there regardless. So you don't have to have the big fixtures. Whereas in Victoria and New South Wales, where the games are a bit more frequent, you do need a bit of a draw card. And I think Christian's spot on in saying that Japan one quite possibly could be headed over there. But no, you're right in that the atmosphere is going to be a big part of it. Just the familiarity of playing in that venue as well could be a big part of it for the Socceroos, because obviously they played a lot of football there over the years. And the squad's chopped and changed over that time and things, but it's still, in terms of, there's no real home of football, but they've played a lot of football at Amy Park, and they've gotten some great results there. So it's almost this sort of weird superstitious thing, I suppose, that might play a part in it. We know that footballers are a bit weird like that, so maybe that's gonna help them out as well. But it's going to be a fascinating game because it's a real test for the side after that Asian Cup where it just sort of never really got going. But we're still agonizingly close to a decent result. It feels like if they can kick on and they can, play some of the football that we've seen in these past couple of friendlies, right, where they do look to have really gelled together. There's this clear, ideology going forwards of getting certain players involved in different ways to make sure that the attacks are fluid and things like that. Like, if we can see more of that in these bigger games, that's going to be huge. And it should just be a fantastic match. I can't wait to watch it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think they put this out on the socials. The Socceroos haven't lost in Melbourne since like 1974 or something like that.
Well, there you go. Now they're going to lose, aren't they?
No, they lost to Iran at the MCG in 1997.
All right, I'll have to.
That was a draw, I believe. Was
it a draw?
Australia was 2-0 up, and then Iran came back to draw 2-2 in that game.
Yeah.
Yes,
and I'll just add as well, we obviously played Saudi Arabia the last World Cup qualifier campaign, drew 0-0, I believe it was in Sydney, and then lost 1-0 over in Saudi. So it wasn't able to manage to even score a goal there. So they're obviously going to be a tough opposition, but hopefully Amy Park can get the Socceroos over the line.
Yeah, and of course beat Argentina, the world champions, at the World Cup as well, which we failed to do. So there you go.
Got close, though. Got close. Bloody Emmy Martinez's armpit against Gareth Bale. Never going to get that moment back. But as part of this press as well, James Johnson at Football Australia also talked about the Matildas' search for a new head coach. It came after slightly confusing times, Poletti, where they announced a friendly against Germany without even an interim coach appointed. It seems like that's probably the likely scenario. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the fact that if they will not rush this process, they can go and get the right manager. And if that comes after this friendly at Germany, then someone else will step in.
Yeah, I mean, look, the only new thing that we kind of got out of this is the idea that we're talking to a number of coaches at the moment, which tells me that they've started the process, right? JJ wasn't quite clear in his press conference upon his return from France that, they'd started the process. We now know that they've started that process, which, again, shouldn't be too much of a shock. We know these games have to be organised, far in advance, travel schedules, stadium hire, all that fun stuff. I'm not thrilled by the idea of playing Germany in Germany. It's not because I'm against the fixture as a whole. It's just, we just saw this game at the at the Olympics. But JJ did say that, this window was going to take place in Europe. They were going to be away games. We've still got a second game this window to announce if there is an interim coach. Who is it? I still think it should be Melandrietta. I think she should get first crack at the Matildas job if she wants it. And it would not surprise me if she's named the interim, if they choose to go the interim route for this. But yeah, we'll see what happens in the coming days, coming weeks, I should say.
Yeah, it seems logical. I think it is worth noting as well that whilst Johnson didn't explicitly state that they'd started looking for a coach, he did talk about the fact that they've always been monitoring the market. So they would have had a list in place, but now that switch is flicked of actively seeking people out. Let's go to some transfer news. Melbourne City have made a double signing. They've picked up Michael Matriciani. I think I nailed that actually. Michael Matriciani. We talked about him a couple of weeks ago.
Christian?
Shocked.
Yes, approval. Wow, I doubted myself.
Is that more or less shocking than Christian not having dropped out of the recording yet?
Oh,
no, it's not shocking at all because he's actually on a laptop today.
That's true. That's true.
Joke, Jacob. Honestly.
Anyway, our friends at Front Page Football revealed that news exclusively a couple of weeks ago. That has proved to be true now. They've announced him officially. And then new midfielder Andreas Kuhn, Jacob, he's 29 years old from Austria, spent majority of his career in the Austrian Bundesliga. Now, people have kind of talked about this as a Tolgay Arslan replacement. I think I saw Joey Lynch tweeting out that City think he is more of a deeper lying player. Yeah. It's not quite the same profile or anything, but they're definitely big shoes to fill if people want him to replace Tolgay Arslan in the team.
Well, I think honestly he could play more of a Hamza Saki role than a Tolgay Arslan role, and we saw how big his departure was in terms of just how the midfield was structured for City last season. Because once he'd left, they really struggled to progress the ball through those central areas, and I think that he's not going to be a defensive midfielder per se, but he will be that slightly deeper player who is more likely to receive the ball on the turn and sort of progress it forwards a little bit more. Whereas Arslan was the player that they were targeting, right? He was the end point to get the ball to him in that final third. Whereas I think Kuhn could be somebody who plays, bit deeper and needs the player to get the ball into the final third in the first place. 29 years old, so still got a little bit of time ahead of him, which is nice. Should be sort of at his peak or just coming over the top of it. But by this point, had a very long career, over 100 appearances in the Austrian Bundesliga, which is, it's a pretty solid league. And I think he played for Sturm Graz over there. And most recently was in the Greek Super League last season.
Nikos Virgos' old club.
Yeah.
There you
And
go.
I was about to say, there's been a fair few A-League players and Australian players that have gone through the Greek leagues as well. I mean, Paul Izzo's come back from a stint in Greece and, looks amazing. So, there's the potential for him to be a very, very good player. But I do think that City fans do need to temper their expectations a bit, in that he's not going to be an Arslan replacement, because you're not going to be able to replace Tolgay Arslan. Just the quality that he had and his ability to do just insane things on the ball, you don't get that very often. There's been very few players in the A-League's history who have had that sort of talent and quality. So while it's possible he could be very, very good, I think his profile is, slightly deeper. I don't think he's going to be necessarily as big an attacking threat, but I think he's going to be arguably more important in build-up, because he's got that ability to, sit deeper, win the ball back on his own as well, and not just rely on his teammates to do that. And like I said, play that sort of Hamza Saki role where he helps progress the ball forwards. And with the likes of Max Caputo sort of starting to embed himself into the team, he's going to need all the service that he can get and the help that he can get in getting used to playing, professional football and getting starting minutes. And somebody like this could be a real help in that department.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Poletti, I hope you're ready. We got some good feedback on this segment the other day, actually. I think we had a comment on YouTube saying they loved Poletti's little recap of the Dub transfer news. Haven't quite got your 63 million or whatever it was today, but here you go. Off you go.
Okay, so we are going to start in Brisbane with the Raw. They've signed Evdokia Papadanova, a 6-time Bulgarian Women's Player of the Year. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know too much about the Bulgarian league, if anything at all. But, a 6-time Women's Player of the Year would indicate that she's doing something right. So this could be a good signing for Brisbane. Holly Palmer and Aisha Norrie have departed the Raw. We then move to the Central Coast, where Izzy Gomez, fresh off a Sapphire Cup win, has re-signed for 2 more years with the Mariners. And the Mariners also announced that Annalise Rasmussen, who was their first ever signing and club academy graduate, has also signed on for 2 more years, while goalkeeper Ash Irwin has signed a 1-year deal. Hang on, my catch just handed me a note. Defender Ash Irwin has signed a 1-year deal with the Mariners. We'll then head to Summer Wonderland, where Talia Yunus has inked a 1-year deal with the Mariners, continuing on with her contract there. At Western United, Philippines international Sarah, I guess Vic, I want to say that's how you pronounce it. I probably completely butchered that. Has signed a 1-year deal while inaugural captain Jacqueline Savicki departs. There's also Philippines international for another opportunity. While they've also signed junior Matilda Ilana Cordolino on a 2-year deal. I haven't seen a ton of Cordolino. I've watched little bits of the NPL women's here and there. But by all accounts, an absolute superstar and a good signing for Western United from everyone I've talked to or listened to about the signing. Head to the City of Churches now. Katie Bowler and Zoe Tolland have signed on for 2 more years with the Reds, while Marilee Mullen and Sarah Morgan have inked 1-year extensions with Adelaide. And then Sam Kerr returns to Perth Glory. Sort of. Perth Glory have announced that they'll play their dub games at the Sam Kerr Football Centre in the 2024-25 season as they say goodbye to Macedonia Park. And then, as I mentioned, congratulations to the Northern Tigers and commiserations to Sydney University as the Northern Tigers 2-1 victors in the New South Wales Sapphire Cup last night. And if you want to read more about that game, you can head to roundballaustralia.com.au.
Massive plug from Poletti, putting in the clickbait 54 minutes into the episode.
I was going to say, if you're looking for a title for the podcast, Lockie, there it is right there. Sam Kerr returns to Perth.
We might have to bump this segment up about 50 minutes for that to work, but...
Don't worry, I'm better than that. I think we did... I don't think we talked about this when it happened, but the whole City of Churches thing for Adelaide, we have mentioned it before, but like back when Gather Round happened in the AFL, there was this big thing about, media not being allowed to call them the City of Churches, then that memo go out and everyone called it them the City of Churches. Adelaide's new kit, Jacob, I believe they announced it for the Australia Cup, but it's also their A-League kit. Has a bunch of churches on it. So I don't know how that fits into
like some of the design.
In the church as well.
Yeah. It's so they did the photo shoot at St. Peter's Cathedral which is in North Adelaide. Massive church that overlooks Adelaide Oval. We've probably seen tons of pictures of it, but they actually used some of the design of the stonework in the church on the kit as like this like sublimated design, which you can't see when you're looking at it from afar. But if you actually get a hold of the kit and look at it, these really subtle details, which and then it's got printed on it in the bottom corner as well. It says City of Churches on it. So they're sort of leaning heavily into that this year, and I kind of like it. It's a bit cheesy, right? Because it's not a City of Churches. It just the name actually, I believe, quick Jacob history lesson here, came from the fact that it was a free state, right? It was settled by colonialists and not a penal colony, and so it was this idea of a City of Churches because it's peaceful and it's good people rather than criminals that have come over here, right? And in fact, they actually started out by thinking that they wouldn't even need a prison here. They were like, we don't need a jail, we'll be fine. And then quickly realised a couple of months in, actually, no, we're going to need something. There's your quick little history lesson on
Adelaide
that
fans
whole...
have to pray at church 3 times a day to make...
that was a lot better than what I was going to say. I was going to say, do you think they've lent into the City of Churches theme because they need to pray that they're actually going to make finals this year? But
Divine intervention,
Christian delivered it a lot better than I did.
I was going to say, so Jacob, you're saying that you're the good kind of Englishman that's come to Australia.
Before we all get cancelled, shall we?
Unlike my English ancestors, potentially. I'm not sure, actually. I don't know. But anyway, we have a few other things to talk about before we end up. We'll go through these rather quickly. But a small update on the NST discussions. We gave you Football Australia's statement on Tuesday. We've heard a little bit more, all in a very similar, non-revealing kind of way. But statements this time from one of the clubs and from Nick Galatas as well, the chairman of the Association of Australian Football Clubs, who represent a lot of this movement towards the NST as well. So similar kind of words, but hearing it from both sides now is promising, is how I view it. Christian, Central Coast Mariners have a new signing, this time in the executive box. They've appointed Alyssa Neri, who becomes the first female CEO in the APL.
Yeah, it seems like Mariners can't, put a foot wrong both on and off the pitch. They're ticking all the boxes. She has a lot of experience, in the business side of the game. Obviously, in that statement she released, she said her focus is on local engagement and developing talent, which obviously we've seen the Mariners do in previous seasons, which has got them to this point of, attaining success. So hopefully that continues. And I think all in all, you can't really complain with the appointment.
All right, couple of friendly results. The Glory got a 3-0 win over Sorrento before their Australia Cup tie next week. David Zrilich seemed pretty happy. Obviously, they're still in the very early stages and there's a lot of work to do, but a good start for Perth. There was a 2-2 draw between Auckland and the Mariners that concludes Auckland's little tour of New South Wales, I believe. They played a few clubs down there. So they're heading back home now to finish their pre-season before the A-League gets underway. The International Football Cup is in Perth next week. 4 of the world's best women's teams, featuring many of our Matildas players: Poletti, Manchester City, West Ham, PSG, Leicester City. Of course, it would have been nice if Claire Hunt was still playing for PSG. I don't think they have any Aussies apart from that. So they're on one side. But if you are anywhere close to HBF Park next week, that is the place to be.
It is, and if you're not, you can watch it live and exclusive on Optus Sport, and you don't even need to pay for it. It's off the paywall. You just need to create an account. That was announced yesterday, maybe. I've lost track. The days are all just blending into each other. But yeah, so all you need to do is create an account. You don't need to pay, and you can watch all of those games on Optus Sport, which is what I'll be doing because I've done enough traveling already, and I'm going to be doing enough traveling over the next couple of months.
Very nice. Okay. And finally, the Pararoos and the Paramatildas have launched the Undefeated Challenge. Now, the Undefeated Challenge is a week-long virtual event where participants can choose to run, walk, swim, ride, or roll as far as they can in 7 days to raise vital funds to support both teams who are competing at the 2024 IFCPF World Cup in Spain. Jacob, a nice little initiative to help raise some funds to get our, players that are affected with cerebral palsy off to play for the Pararoos and the Paramatildas in their green and gold national jerseys.
I think it's cool, but I think it's also a little sad that they need to do it to be able to raise funds to go and compete. It would be nice for them not to have to do it. And I do find it funny as well where you roll, they clearly mean, people in like wheelchairs and whatever to roll. But when you said roll, I envisioned somebody rolling down a hill. And I was like, that would be a fun way of doing it. So if anybody does go out there and do that, hats off to you. And I'll probably give you donate a couple of dollars for that, because that's one hell of an effort. But no, it's a cool idea, cool little thing to raise some funds. But yeah, it is a little sad that they feel that the necessity to do it in the first place to be able to actually go and compete. But I mean, there's definitely worse ways of going about it, and I think it's a fun little challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone listening is going to do the challenge and puts on social media a clip of them rolling down a hill as part of this challenge, we'll retweet on our socials as well, and we'll give you a plug, and hopefully we can raise some money that way. I think that'll be a cool thing to do. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thank you again to Deploy Football for supporting our podcast and our coverage of Australian football. Jacob Stevens, thank you for your company today.
Pleasure as always, Lockie.
Christian Montegan, a full episode without a dropout. You're making me very happy.
Well, I mean, Jacob had his camera so a bit blurry, so Jacob -1, I'm on +1, so great stuff.
Sorry, where did you earn a point in all that?
I didn't drop out at all.
Well, so that's the standard.
That's just a 0.
Well, for me, considering previous episodes, surely the standard for bar is this low.
We'll give you that because you do have a lot of negatives to make up for. And Poletti as well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all very much for listening at home. We will be back on Tuesday to recap those first few games of the round of 16 and, of course, keeping you up to date with everything that's going on in Australian football. Thank you again for listening. Goodbye.